The black ships came from the void like nightmares made real. Captain Jake Morrison watched the enemy fleet through the main screen of his bridge and felt his blood turn cold. 12 massive vessels hung in space around the burning world of New Eden, each one the size of a small moon. Their dark hulls reflected no light from the dying planet below. These were the ships of the Korthek Empire, and they had been the terror of the galaxy for 300 years. Jake stood tall on the bridge of the USS Defiance, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a man of 40 years, with gray streaks in his brown hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. His ship was alone in this dark corner of space, facing an enemy that had never known defeat. The Defiance was a heavy cruiser, built for war but dwarfed by the alien dreadnoughts that filled the space ahead. The communication panel beeped softly. Lieutenant Lisa Park turned from her station with worry on her young face. She had short, blonde hair and quick fingers that danced across her controls. "Captain, we received one last message from New Eden before the attack began," she said. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the fear beneath it. 2 billion people lived on that world, sir. Jake nodded slowly. He had read the reports about New Eden during the 3-day journey to reach this system. It was a farming world, peaceful and green, where families had built homes among rolling hills and crystal rivers. The children there had never seen war. Now their cities burned under alien guns, and their skies filled with smoke. "Any word from the fleet?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Lisa shook her head. "Admiral Price is fighting the Korthek at Centaurus Station. Captain Brown is defending the mining colonies at Kepler 7. Every ship we have is scattered across the galaxy, fighting their own battles. We are on our own, sir." The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez had pushed the reactor beyond safe limits to get them here in time, but they had arrived too late to stop the attack. Danny was a short man with thick arms and grease under his fingernails. He knew every bolt and wire on the Defiance and had kept her running through a dozen battles. Navigation. Officer Ryan Foster studied his charts with worried eyes. He was young, barely 25, but he could plot a course through hyperspace better than any pilot in the fleet. "Captain," he said without looking up, "the Korthek have positioned their ships in a standard attack formation. They are not expecting any resistance." Weapons Officer Amy Chun checked her targeting systems for the 3rd time. She was a small woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her fingers moved with practiced ease across the weapon controls. "All guns are ready, Captain. Plasma cannons charged and torpedo tubes loaded. But, sir, we only have enough ammunition for one major battle." Medical Officer Ben Taylor worked quietly at his station, preparing the sick bay for wounded. He was a gentle man who hated violence, but understood its necessity. His hands were steady as a surgeon's, and he had saved more lives than he could count. "Medical teams are standing by, Captain. We are ready for whatever comes." Jake looked at each of his officers in turn. These were good people, brave people, who had followed him into this impossible situation. The Defiance carried 800 souls, men and women who had sworn to protect the innocent. Now they faced a fleet that had conquered half the galaxy. The Korthek were a species of reptilian warriors, 8 feet tall with scales like black armor and eyes like burning coals. They lived for conquest and battle, turning every world they captured into a slave colony. Their technology was ancient and powerful, their ships protected by shields that had never been broken. For 3 centuries, they had expanded their empire, crushing anyone who dared to stand against them. Admiral Vector commanded the Korthek fleet from his flagship, a massive vessel called the Death's Edge. He was old even by Korthek standards, his scales scarred from 100 battles. He had personally overseen the destruction of 47 worlds, and New Eden was just another victory to add to his collection. The screams of dying enemies were music to his ears. On the bridge of his flagship, Vector watched the final bombardment of New Eden's surface. His tactical officer reported that the planetary defenses had been completely destroyed. The orbital stations were now debris floating in space. The major cities were burning ruins. Soon there would be nothing left but ashes and slaves. "Admiral," the tactical officer said, his voice a low growl, "our sensors detect a single human ship approaching from the edge of the system." Vector barely glanced at the display. One ship meant nothing to him. The humans were a young species, barely worthy of notice. Their ships were small and weak compared to Korthic dreadnoughts. "Ignore it," he commanded. "Continue the bombardment." But Captain Morrison had no intention of being ignored. He opened a communication channel to the Korthic fleet, his voice carrying across space to the alien ships. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth vessel Defiance. You will cease your attack on New Eden immediately and withdraw from this system." The response came quickly. Admiral Vector's image appeared on the main screen, his reptilian features twisted in amusement. "Human," he said, his voice like rocks grinding together, "you are either very brave or very foolish. I have 12 dreadnoughts under my command. You have one small ship. Surrender now, and I may allow your crew to serve as slaves." Jake's jaw tightened. "I have a better offer, Admiral. Leave this system now, and I may allow your ships to escape intact." Vector's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. "You amuse me, human. Very well, I will grant you the honor of dying in battle rather than as a slave." He cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. "Destroy them." 6 of the Korthic dreadnoughts turned their massive guns toward the approaching human ship. Energy began to build in their weapon arrays, a deadly glow that promised destruction. Each ship carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Together they could turn a moon to dust. Jake watched the enemy ships rotate to face him and felt his heart begin to beat faster. "All stations report ready," he called out. "Engineering ready," Danny's voice came through the intercom. "Weapons ready," Amy said from her position. "Navigation ready," Ryan confirmed. "Medical ready," Ben added quietly. Jake took a deep breath and settled into his command chair. Around him, his crew worked with calm efficiency. These were the best officers in the fleet, and they trusted him to lead them through this darkness. He would not let them down. The Defiance was more than just a ship to these people. She was their home, their sanctuary, their weapon against the forces of evil. Her hull was made of the finest alloys Earth could produce. Her engines were powered by a reactor that pushed the boundaries of known science. Her weapons were the most advanced humanity had ever built. But most importantly, she carried the hopes and dreams of every human who looked up at the stars and refused to bow to tyranny. The crew of the Defiance had taken an oath to protect the innocent, to stand against the darkness, to fight for what was right no matter the cost. The Korthic had ruled through fear for 3 centuries. They had crushed every species that dared to resist them. Their ships were legend, their warriors unstoppable, their empire eternal. But they had never faced humanity before. They had never encountered a species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Admiral Vector gave the order to fire, confident that the battle would be over in seconds. The combined firepower of 6 dreadnoughts would vaporize the small human ship before it could even return fire. The Death's Edge and its sister ships had destroyed countless enemies this way. But Captain Morrison was not planning to fight like any enemy the Korthic had faced before. The space around the USS Defiance exploded into light and fire as 6 Korthic dreadnoughts opened fire at the same moment. Massive energy beams, each one thicker than a city block, sliced through the void where the human ship had been just seconds before. But Captain Morrison had anticipated this attack, and the Defiance was no longer there. The ship rolled hard to starboard, its smaller size allowing it to move like a dancer among giants. Ryan Foster's hands flew across his navigation controls, plotting a course that seemed impossible. The Defiance twisted and dove, spinning through space as the deadly beams passed harmlessly through empty vacuum. "All stop," Jake commanded, and the ship's engines cut to silence. For a moment, the Defiance hung motionless in space, hidden in the shadow of a large piece of debris from New Eden's destroyed orbital station. The Korthic gunners searched for their target, confused by the human ship's sudden disappearance. They had expected the enemy vessel to charge straight at them, as all their previous opponents had done. Admiral Vector snarled his frustration from the bridge of the Death's Edge. "Where did they go?" he demanded. His tactical officer studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. "Admiral, the human ship appears to have stopped moving. Our sensors are having difficulty maintaining a lock." "Impossible," Vector growled. "No ship can hide from our sensors." But the Defiance was not hiding in the way the Korthic understood. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez had modified the ship's hull plating with a special coating that scattered sensor beams. It was an experimental technology, untested in real combat, but it was working better than anyone had hoped. Jake watched the enemy ships through his main screen, studying their formation. The 6 dreadnoughts that had fired were now spread out, searching for their target. The other 6 ships continued their bombardment of New Eden, confident that their sister vessels could handle one small human ship. "Amy," Jake said quietly, "target the lead dreadnought. Full power to forward guns." Weapons Officer Amy Chun's fingers danced across her controls. The Defiance carried plasma cannons, a new type of weapon that focused superheated gas into coherent beams. The technology was based on research stolen from an ancient alien wreck found drifting in deep space. No one knew if it would work against Korthic shields. "Targeting solution locked," Amy reported. "All weapons ready to fire." "Fire!" Jake commanded. The Defiance erupted from its hiding place like a predator striking from ambush. 4 plasma cannons fired simultaneously, their beams converging on the lead Korthic dreadnought. The alien ship's shields flared bright blue as they absorbed the energy. But then something unexpected happened. The shields flickered. For just a moment, they failed completely, and the plasma beams struck the dreadnought's hull directly. Explosions rippled across the massive ship's surface as armor plating melted under the intense heat. The Korthic vessel staggered in space, listing to one side as secondary explosions tore through its interior. On the bridge of the Death's Edge, Admiral Vector stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The impossible had happened. A human ship had actually damaged one of his dreadnoughts. In 3 centuries of conquest, no enemy had ever managed to breach Korthic shields. "How?" he whispered, his scaled hands gripping the arms of his command. Chair. His science officer worked frantically at his console. "Admiral, the human weapons appear to operate on a frequency that disrupts our shield harmonics. Our defenses are not calibrated to stop this type of energy beam." Vector's eyes burned with rage. These humans had somehow developed a weapon specifically designed to counter Korthic technology. They had studied his people's ships and found a weakness that no one else had ever discovered. This was not luck or accident. This was planning. "All ships," he commanded, "converge on the human vessel. Destroy it immediately." The 12 Korthic dreadnoughts turned as one, their massive hulls moving with surprising grace for their size. They abandoned their bombardment of New Eden and focused entirely on the small ship that had dared to wound one of their own. Hundreds of weapon ports opened along their hulls, revealing guns that could reduce mountains to dust. But Captain Morrison was not planning to fight 12 ships at once. "Ryan," he called to his navigator, "take us into the asteroid field." The young officer's eyes widened. "Sir, the field is dense. Navigation will be extremely difficult." "That's what I'm counting on," Jake replied. The Defiance accelerated toward the belt of rocky debris that surrounded New Eden's outer system. These asteroids were the remains of an ancient planet, broken apart billions of years ago by some cosmic catastrophe. They ranged in size from pebbles to mountains, tumbling through space in an endless dance. Ryan guided the ship into the field with skill that bordered on artistry. The Defiance was small enough to slip between asteroids that would crush a larger vessel. Her engines responded instantly to his commands, threading a path through the deadly maze of floating rock. The Korthic dreadnoughts followed, but their massive size made navigation difficult. They were forced to blast their way through the larger asteroids, their weapons turning ancient stone to vapor. This slowed their pursuit and made it hard for them to maintain formation. "Contact," Amy reported from her weapons station. "Korthic cruiser off our starboard bow." Through the swirling field of debris, a smaller Korthic ship had managed to get ahead of them. It was only half the size of a dreadnought, but still 3 times larger than the Defiance. Its guns were already swinging toward the human ship. "Evasive." "Action," Jake ordered. The Defiance rolled inverted and dove beneath a house-sized asteroid just as the Korthic cruiser fired. The energy beam struck the rock instead, vaporizing it in a flash of light. But the human ship was already gone, disappearing behind another asteroid before the alien gunners could retarget. Danny Rodriguez's voice crackled through the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, I'm pushing the reactor to 120%. We can maintain this pace for maybe an hour before we risk a core breach." "Understood," Jake replied. He knew his engineer was performing miracles just to keep them moving at this speed. The Defiance was running beyond her design limits. Held together by skill and determination, the chase continued through the asteroid field with the Defiance, leading the Korthic ships deeper into the maze of floating stone. Jake used every trick he had learned in 20 years of naval service. He hid behind the larger asteroids, used the smaller ones to block enemy targeting, and exploited the gravitational effects of the rocky bodies to change course without using his engines. Lieutenant Lisa Park monitored Korthic communications from her position at the communications console. "Captain," she reported, "they are getting frustrated. Their formation is breaking apart as they try to navigate the field." Jake smiled grimly. This was exactly what he had hoped for. The Korthic were used to fighting in open space, where their superior firepower and numbers gave them overwhelming advantage. But in the asteroid field, those advantages meant little. Here, skill and cunning mattered more than raw power. A massive dreadnought appeared suddenly from behind a moon-sized asteroid, its guns already trained on the Defiance. There was no time to evade, no place to hide. Amy fired without waiting. For orders, her plasma beams striking the alien ship's forward shields. Once again, the Korthic defenses flickered and failed. The dreadnought's bridge exploded in a ball of fire as the plasma beams punched through its armor. The massive ship began to tumble, its engines dark and its weapons silent. One of the most powerful warships in the galaxy had been reduced to drifting, wreckage by a vessel 1/10 its size. Admiral Victor watched the destruction of his second ship with growing fury. The humans were making fools of his fleet, using tactics he had never encountered before. They did not fight with honor like the Korthic. They struck from ambush, used the environment to their advantage, and disappeared before his ships could. "Retaliate. Cowards," he snarled. "They fight like prey animals, scurrying from rock to rock." But his tactical officer had a different opinion. "Admiral, with respect, they fight like hunters. They are using our size and numbers against us. Every Move we make, they have anticipated. Vector's claws scraped against his command chair. He had underestimated these humans, treated them like all the other species his empire had conquered. But they were different. They did not panic in the face of superior force. They did not surrender when defeat seemed certain. Instead, they found ways to turn their weaknesses into strengths. The battle had been raging for 4 hours, and the Defiance showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, the human crew seemed to be getting better at their deadly game of hide and seek. They had damaged 3 more Korthik ships and destroyed another cruiser, all while taking minimal damage themselves. Medical Officer Ben Taylor had treated only a handful of wounded, mostly crew members injured when the ship made particularly violent maneuvers. The Korthik, meanwhile, had lost hundreds of warriors and billions of credits worth of equipment. But Jake knew they could not keep this up forever. His ship's ammunition was running low, and the reactor was showing signs of strain. Soon they would have to make their move, to either escape or fight one final battle. And Admiral Vector was learning from each encounter, adapting his tactics to counter the human ship's advantages. The real test was yet to come. Intelligence Officer Kate Sullivan worked quietly at her station while the battle raged around them. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and quick fingers, trained to intercept and decode enemy communications. For the past hour she had been listening to Korthik transmissions, picking apart their military codes with the help of the ship's computer. "Captain," she called out suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise of the bridge. "I have something important." Jake turned from the main screen, where he had been watching another Korthik dreadnought search for them among the asteroids. "What did you find, Kate?" "I have been monitoring their communications, sir. The Korthik ships are not operating independently. They are all connected to Admiral Victor's flagship through a central command network. Every targeting solution, every tactical decision, every movement order comes from the Death's Edge." Jake's eyes widened as he understood the implications. "You mean if we could disable their flagship ... the entire fleet would lose coordination?" "Yes, sir. They would be like a body without a head, unable to work together effectively." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the engines. Everyone understood what this meant. The Death's Edge was the largest and most heavily armed ship in the Korthik fleet. It carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon, and its defenses had never been breached in 3 centuries of warfare. Attacking it directly would be suicide. "Captain," Ryan said from his navigation station, "the flagship is positioned at the center of their formation. To reach it, we would have to get past at least 6 other dreadnoughts." Amy checked her weapons display and shook her head. "Sir, we have enough ammunition for maybe 2 more major engagements. We cannot fight our way through the entire fleet." Jake stared at the tactical display, studying the positions of the enemy ships. The Death's Edge hung in space like a dark mountain, surrounded by its escort vessels. It was the most dangerous target in the galaxy, protected by layers of armor, and shields that had turned aside every attack ever made against it. But sometimes the most dangerous course was also the only one that led to victory. "Danny," Jake called down to the engine room through the intercom, "how much power can you give me?" The chief engineer's voice crackled back, filled with exhaustion and determination. "Captain, I can give you everything she has. But if I push..." The reactor passed 150%. We risk a core breach that would destroy the ship. How long could we maintain that power level? "Maybe 10 minutes, sir. Maybe less." Jake nodded slowly. 10 minutes would have to be enough. He turned to address his crew, looking each of them in the eye. "I am going to propose something that goes against every principle of naval warfare. We are going to attack the Death's Edge directly." The bridge crew exchanged glances. They had followed Captain Morrison through a dozen battles, trusted him. with their lives more times than they could count. If he said this was their best chance, they would follow him into the fires of hell itself. "Sir," Amy said quietly, "what are your orders?" Jake moved to the center of the bridge, his voice calm and steady. "We are going to make a direct run at the flagship. Full power to engines and weapons. We will punch through their formation before they can react and get close enough to their command ship to do real damage." "Captain," Ben Taylor spoke up from his medical station, his voice worried, "the casualties will be severe. A direct assault against those odds." "I know, Ben, but if we succeed, we save 2 billion people on New Eden. If we fail, we die fighting for something that matters. I cannot ask for better odds than that." Lieutenant Lisa Park checked her communications array one last time. "All stations report ready, Captain." Jake settled into his command chair and gripped the armrests. Around him, his crew prepared for what might be their final battle. They were 800 souls against an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. But they were not fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting for the innocent, for the defenseless, for the right of free people to live without fear. "Take use out of the asteroid field, Ryan. Plot a direct course for the Death's Edge." The USS Defiance emerged from the maze of floating rock like a predator stepping into the light. Admiral Vector saw the human ship appear on his tactical display and felt a cold satisfaction. Finally, the cowards had decided to face him in open combat. "All ships," he commanded, "converge on the human vessel. This ends now." The remaining Korthic dreadnoughts turned to face the Defiance, their massive guns swinging toward the small ship. 10 vessels, each one capable of destroying a city with a single salvo. Their combined firepower could turn a planet to ash, but Captain Morrison was not planning to give them time to use that firepower. "All ahead full," he ordered. The Defiance leaped forward like a hunting cat, its engines blazing at maximum power. Danny Rodriguez had pushed the reactor beyond every safety limit, feeding energy to the drives that made the ship shake with barely contained force. The hull groaned under the stress, but it held together. The first Korthic ship to fire was the cruiser Bone Crusher. Its energy beams reached out across space toward the approaching human vessel. But the Defiance was moving too fast, changing course too quickly for the alien gunners to track. The beams passed harmlessly behind the ship as it accelerated toward the enemy formation. "Return fire," Jake commanded. Amy's plasma cannons spoke with voices of thunder, their beams reaching out to caress the Bone Crusher's shields. Once again, the Korthic defenses failed against the human weapons. The cruiser exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. The other Korthic ships opened fire all at once, filling the void with deadly energy. The Defiance rolled and twisted through the barrage like a dancer in a storm. Some beams came so close that they scorched the hull plating, but the ship flew on untouched. "Hull breach on Deck 7. Came a damage report from somewhere in the ship. "Fire suppression systems activated on Deck 12, called another voice, but still the Defiance flew on, diving deeper into the heart of the enemy formation. The dreadnought Skullbreaker tried to ram the human ship, turning its massive bulk to crush the smaller vessel. But Ryan guided them under its hull, so close that they could see the alien markings on its armor plating. Amy fired as they passed, her beams striking the dreadnought's underbelly where the armor was thinnest. Explosions rippled along the massive ship's hull as plasma burned through metal like acid. The Skullbreaker began to list to one side, its engines failing one by one. 2 minutes to target, Ryan reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. Around them, Admiral Vector watched the human ship approach his flagship with growing amazement. They had already destroyed 3 of his vessels and damaged 2 more. Their tactics made no sense by Korthic standards, but they were devastatingly effective. "Bring us about," he ordered his helmsman. I want our main guns bearing on that ship. The Death's Edge was the largest warship ever built by the Korthik Empire. Its main battery could crack a planet's crust with a single shot. Its shields had turned aside the combined fire of entire enemy fleets. Its armor was thicker than a city, block and harder than diamond, but it was also slow to maneuver, designed for battles against fleets rather than single ships. As the massive vessel began its ponderous turn, the Defiance closed the final distance between them. All weapons, Jake commanded, target their command section. The USS Defiance opened fire with everything it had: plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, experimental railguns. Every weapon the ship carried unleashed its fury at point-blank range. The beams struck the Death's Edge's shields, and for a moment they held, blazing with captured energy dot. Then the shields failed completely. The plasma beams punched through the flagship's armor like hot knives through butter. Explosions tore through the command section as critical systems overloaded. The bridge, where Admiral Vector had commanded his fleet for over a century, erupted in fire and smoke. Victor felt his ship dying around him as consoles exploded and support beams collapsed. Emergency lights flickered in the smoke-filled air. His tactical officer lay motionless at his station, killed by flying debris. Half his crew was dead or wounded, but in his final moments, the old admiral understood something that chilled his reptilian blood. The humans had not won through superior technology or numbers. They had won through sheer determination, through a willingness to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. These were not the weak primitives his intelligence reports had described. These were warriors who fought with a passion that even the Korthik could not match. They did not seek conquest or glory. They fought to protect the innocent, to defend the weak, to stand against tyranny wherever it raised its head. "Signal the fleet," Vector gasped with his dying breath. Tell them we have awakened something we do not understand." The Death's Edge exploded like a dying star, its destruction visible from every ship in the system. Chunks of metal, the size of buildings, tumbled through space, glowing with residual heat. The flagship that had been the terror of the galaxy for 3 centuries was now nothing but expanding debris. On the bridge of the Defiance, Jake watched the explosion fade and felt no satisfaction. There was no joy in taking life, even the life of an enemy. But sometimes violence was the only way to stop greater violence. The destruction of the Death's Edge sent shockwaves through the remaining Korthik fleet that went far beyond the physical explosion. For 3 centuries, their ships had operated under a rigid command structure where every decision flowed from the flagship. Now that central authority was gone, and 9 dreadnoughts found themselves adrift without orders. Captain Morthick of the dreadnought Bloodfang was the first to recover from the shock. He was a veteran warrior who had served under Admiral Vector for 50 years, and the loss of his commander filled him with rage. "All ships," he transmitted to the fleet, "attack the human vessel. Avenge our admiral." But Captain Zekano of the Star Killer had different ideas. He was younger than Morthick and more cautious. "Negative," he replied. "We should withdraw and report this disaster to the High Command. The humans have weapons we do not understand." Captain Drake Thull of the Void Render disagreed with both of them. "We continue the bombardment of New Eden," he commanded. "That was our original mission. We will complete it and then deal with the human ship." 3 different orders went out to the Korthik fleet at the same time, and confusion spread through their ranks like a virus. Some ships turned to attack the Defiance, while others continued their assault on the planet below. A few began to pull back toward the edge of the system, preparing to jump to hyperspace. Captain Morrison watched this chaos unfold on his tactical display and knew this was his chance. "Ryan," he called to his navigator, "take us toward the ships that are still bombarding New Eden." We need to stop them before they finish destroying the planet. The USS Defiance limped through space toward the 3 Korthik vessels that continued their attack on the defenseless world. The ship's hull was scarred by battle damage, and several decks were sealed off due to hull breaches. But her engines still ran and her guns still fired, and that was all that mattered. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez worked like a man possessed in the bowels of the ship. Sparks flew from damaged conduits, and the air grew thick with smoke from electrical fires. His reactor was running far beyond safe limits, held together by skill and prayer. "Come on, girl," he whispered to his engines. "Just a little bit longer." The first Korthik ship they encountered was the Bone Grinder, a massive dreadnought that was methodically destroying New Eden's remaining cities. Its captain, Korvash, saw the approaching human vessel and felt a mixture of fear and anger. This small ship had already destroyed 4 of his sister vessels, including the mighty Death's Edge. "Target the human ship," Korvash ordered his weapons officer. "All guns, maximum power." But the Bone Grinder was still focused on planetary bombardment, its massive guns pointed downward toward New Eden's surface. It would take precious minutes to reposition those weapons toward the approaching Defiance, and Captain Morrison did not intend to give them that time. "Amy," Jake called to his weapons officer, "target their engine section." Weapons officer Amy Chun worked at her console despite the pain of a broken arm. She had refused to leave her post when the ship took damage, wrapping her injury in a makeshift sling and continuing to fight. Her targeting solution locked onto the Bone Grinder's engine compartment, where its massive reactors powered the dreadnought systems. "Firing," she announced. The Defiance's remaining plasma cannons spoke in unison, their beams reaching across space to strike the Korthik vessel's stern. Once again, the alien shields failed against the human weapons. The plasma burned through armor plating and into the ship's reactor core. The Bone Grinder exploded from within as its power systems overloaded. The dreadnought broke apart in a chain of secondary explosions, its hull splitting open like a cracked egg. Debris rained down on New Eden's atmosphere, burning up like meteors in the planet's sky. "1 down," Jake said grimly. 2 to go. But the other Korthik ships had learned from their sister vessel's mistake. The Star Render and the Planet Killer turned away from their bombardment to face the approaching human ship. Their captains, Velkorth and Nextau, coordinated their attack through direct communication. "We attack together," Velkorth commanded. "Both ships, all weapons. The human vessel cannot evade us both." The 2 dreadnoughts separated, moving to bracket the Defiance between them. It was a classic pincer maneuver, designed to trap the enemy ship in a crossfire from which there was no escape. The Korthik had used this tactic to destroy countless enemy vessels over the centuries. Jake saw what they were doing and smiled grimly. "They are learning," he told his crew. "But we can learn too. Ryan, take us straight at the Star Render." Maximum acceleration. Navigator Ryan Foster's hands flew across his controls, his injured ship responding to his commands like a living thing. The Defiance shot forward toward one of the enemy dreadnoughts, closing the distance at suicidal speed. "Captain," Ryan called out, his voice tight with strain. "Collision course in 30 seconds. "Hold our course," Jake replied calmly. The Star Render's captain watched the human ship approach with growing alarm. Surely they would turn aside at the last moment. No one was crazy enough to ram a ship 10 times their size. But the seconds ticked by, and the Defiance continued on its collision. Course at the last possible moment, Jake gave the order. "Emergency deceleration. All stop." The Defiance's engines reversed thrust, bringing the ship to a relative halt just meters from the Star Render's hull. They were so close that Jake could see through the alien ship's viewports into its corridors. Then Amy fired every weapon they had at point-blank range. The Star Render's shields were designed to stop attacks from long range, not from a ship practically touching their hull. The plasma beams punched through the alien vessel's armor like it was paper, tearing into vital systems. The dreadnought's bridge exploded in a ball of fire, killing its captain and most of his senior officers. But the victory came at a cost. A planet killer had completed its flanking maneuver and opened fire on the Defiance from behind. Energy beams struck the human ship's rear sections, penetrating damaged armor and tearing into the hull. Explosions rippled through several decks. As power conduits overloaded, hull breach on Deck 4, came a damage report. Engineering section is venting atmosphere. Medical Officer Ben Taylor worked frantically to save the wounded as casualties mounted throughout the ship. His medical bay was overwhelmed with injured crew members, men and women who continued to fight despite their wounds. "I need more hands." "Down here," he called through the intercom. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez sealed himself and his remaining crew into the reactor compartment as atmosphere leaked out around them. "Captain," his voice crackled through the damaged communication system, "I can give you one more full power burst. But after that, we will be running on backup power only." Jake looked at the tactical display. The planet killer was moving to finish them off, its massive guns swinging toward the crippled human ship. 3 other Korthik vessels were also approaching, their captains finally working together to destroy the enemy that had humiliated their fleet. But down on New Eden's surface, something was happening. Lieutenant Lisa Park picked up new transmissions from the planet below, messages in human languages rather than Korthik military codes. "Captain," she called out excitedly, "the planetary defense forces are still operational. They have been hiding in underground bunkers, waiting for a chance to strike back." Jake's eyes lit up with hope. "Can you establish contact with them?" "Already done, sir. Colonel Sam Murphy of the New Eden Defense Corps is standing by." The image of a weathered man in a dirt-stained uniform appeared on the main screen. Behind him, Jake could see the concrete walls of a bunker and the determined faces of soldiers who had been fighting a guerrilla war against the Korthak occupation forces. "Captain Morrison," Colonel Murphy said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "we have been watching your battle. You have given us something we had lost: hope. What do you need from us?" "Colonel, do you have any weapons capable of reaching orbit?" Murphy nodded grimly. "We have 3 surface-to-orbit missile batteries that survived the initial bombardment. We have been saving them for the right moment." "The moment is now," Jake replied. "Target the planet killer. We will coordinate our attack with yours." The dying Defiance and the hidden defenders of New Eden struck as one. Missiles launched from concealed silos on the planet's surface, while the human ship fired its last plasma charges. The planet killer, caught between 2 attacks, found its shields overwhelmed by the combined assault. The massive Korthak dreadnought broke apart under the coordinated fire, its hull splitting open to reveal the twisted wreckage within. But even as it died, its final shots struck the Defiance's already damaged hull. The human ship staggered under the impact, systems failing throughout its length. "Reactor shut down in 30 seconds. Danny's voice called from engineering. "All hands, prepare for emergency power." Jake looked around his damaged bridge at the crew who had followed him through this impossible battle. They had fought against odds that should have destroyed them, yet they were still alive and still fighting. The spirit of humanity burned bright in their eyes, unquenched by wounds or exhaustion. "Signal the remaining Korthik ships," he commanded. "Tell them this system is under human protection. Any vessel that does not withdraw immediately will be destroyed." It was a bluff, of course. The USS Defiance drifted in the dark space above New Eden like a wounded bird learning to fly again. Her hull was scarred by battle damage, and several sections were sealed off where enemy fire had torn through her armor. Emergency lights flickered, in corridors filled with smoke from electrical fires. But she was alive, and more importantly, so were most of her crew. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his damaged bridge and watched the rescue ships arrive from other human colonies. Word of the victory had spread quickly through hyperspace communications, carried by traders and diplomats to every corner of the galaxy. 3 human medical ships and 2 supply vessels had already arrived, with more on the way. Dr. Helen Cross came aboard from the medical ship Mercy to help treat the wounded. She was a small woman with gentle hands and eyes that had seen, too, much suffering. She worked alongside Medical Officer Ben Taylor to save the crew members who had been injured in the battle. 43 dead, Ben reported to the captain, his voice heavy with grief. Over 100 wounded. But we saved them. Sir, we saved 2 billion people. Jake nodded slowly. The cost had been high, but the alternative would have been much worse. Without their intervention, New Eden would have been reduced to ashes, and its people enslaved or killed. Sometimes the price of freedom was measured in blood, and good people had to be willing to pay that price. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez emerged from the engine room covered in grease and exhaustion. His reactor had finally shut down completely, held together by skill and determination far longer than it should have been possible. She will need months of repair work, he told the captain. But the old girl held together when it mattered most. Communications Officer Lisa Park worked with a team of technicians to repair the ship's communication systems. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy as news of the battle spread. The Korthic Empire, once thought invincible, had been defeated by a single human warship. On the capital world of the Andromedan Republic, Chancellor Valtara read the battle reports with growing amazement. Her people were an ancient race of blue-skinned humanoids who had hidden behind their defensive barriers for centuries, too afraid to challenge the Korthic Empire. Now she wondered if that had been a mistake. Send an envoy to Earth, she commanded. Her advisors. These humans have done something we thought was impossible. We need to learn more about them. In the crystal spires of the Centauri Council, the energy beings who governed that region of space held an emergency session. They had fled to their pocket dimension when the Korthic first appeared, abandoning the physical universe to its fate. The humans had shown them that there was another way to respond to tyranny. Perhaps we have been wrong to hide, whispered the council speaker, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Perhaps it is time to take our place in the galaxy. Once again. But the most important reaction came from the Korthic Empire itself. Admiral Vexernier sat in his command chamber on the fortress world of Keltara, reading reports from the survivors of New Eden. He was Vector's chosen successor, a younger warrior who had earned his position through cunning rather than brute force. Reports painted a picture that chilled his reptilian blood. The humans had not won through superior technology or numbers. They had won through something that Korthic had never encountered before, the willingness to sacrifice everything for principles they believed in. They do not fight for conquest. Vexernier said to his tactical advisor, they fight for each other. When one of their colonies is threatened, they will travel across the galaxy to defend it. When faced with impossible odds, they refuse to surrender. His advisor, a scarred veteran, named Greikther, nodded grimly. Admiral, our intelligence reports on the humans were incomplete. We treated them as we would any other primitive species. But they are not primitive. They are something else entirely. Vexernier studied the tactical analysis of the Battle of New Eden. One human ship had destroyed 6 Korthic dreadnoughts, including the mighty Death's Edge. Their captain had made decisions that went against every principle of military doctrine. Yet those decisions had led to victory. They learn from every battle, he observed. Their technology improves with each encounter. Most disturbing of all, they inspire others to resist us. Since news of New Eden spread, we have faced uprisings on a dozen worlds. The Korthic Empire had ruled through fear for 3 centuries. Their massive ships and overwhelming firepower had convinced most species that resistance was futile. But the humans had proven that even the mightiest empire could be defeated by those willing to stand up and fight. On New Eden itself, the work of rebuilding had already begun. Colonel Sam Murphy and his defense forces emerged from their underground bunkers to find a world scarred by war, but not broken. The Korthic had destroyed many cities, but the planet's spirit remained intact. They will rebuild, Murphy told a gathering of survivors in the ruins of New Geneva. They will make their world green again, and they will never forget the ship that came from the stars to save them. Children who had hidden in shelters during the bombardment now played among the ruins, their laughter echoing through the broken streets. They sang songs about the USS Defiance and Captain Morrison, turning the battle into legend, even as it was still being fought. Word of the victory reached Earth 3 days later, carried by a fast courier ship. Admiral Janet Price read the reports in her office at Fleet Headquarters, surrounded by maps of human space and deployment charts for the scattered fleet. "One ship," she said to her aide, a young officer named Lieutenant Gary Brooks. "One ship against an entire Korthic fleet. Morrison and his crew have changed everything." Brooks nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. "Admiral, requests for transfer to the Defiance are flooding in from across the fleet. Everyone wants to serve under Captain Morrison." But Jake Morrison was not thinking about fame or glory as he stood in the observation deck of the medical ship that was treating his wounded crew. He was thinking about the 43 men and women who had died in the battle, good people who would never see their families again. Lieutenant Tom Harris had been killed when a plasma beam penetrated the bridge defenses. He was 26 years old and had been planning to propose to his girlfriend when they returned to Earth. Ensign Mary Foster had died trying to seal a hull breach, sacrificing her life to save her shipmates. She had been the youngest member of the crew, just 22 years old. These were the real heroes of the Battle of New Eden. Not the captain who gave the orders, but the ordinary men and women who carried them out despite the danger. They had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender because they believed in something greater than themselves. The story of the USS Defiance spread to every world in the galaxy through a network of traders, diplomats, and refugees. The insectoid builders, master engineers who had cowered before Korthic might for generations, sent envoys to Earth offering to share their construction techniques. "We have been afraid for so long," their ambassador, a being called Click Singer, explained to the human delegation. "Your people have shown us that there is another way. We wish to learn from you." The energy beings of the 7th dimension emerged from their pocket universe for the first time in centuries. Their leader, a creature of pure thought called the Bright One, manifested before the United Earth Council. "We hid when we should have fought," the Bright One admitted, its voice like singing crystal. "Your species has reminded us of our duty to protect the innocent. We offer our knowledge in service of that cause." Even more importantly, other oppressed species began to organize their own resistance movements. The wolf-like Fenrons, enslaved by the Korthic for 2 centuries, rose up on their homeworld of Lupis Prime. The aquatic cetaceans launched guerrilla attacks against Korthic mining operations in their star system. Each rebellion was inspired by the same simple truth: if one human ship could defeat a Korthic fleet, then freedom was possible for anyone willing to fight for it. Admiral Vexernier watched his empire begin to crumble from within as reports of new uprisings reached him daily. The Korthic military was stretched thin, fighting on dozens of fronts against enemies they had thought beaten. Worse still, some of his own captains were beginning to question whether their cause was just. "Perhaps," suggested his advisor Gregther, We should consider negotiating with the humans. Vexernir's claws scraped against his command throne. The very idea went against everything the Korthik believed in. They were conquerors, not negotiators. They took what they wanted through strength, not words, but the alternative was to continue fighting a war they could no longer win. The humans had shown that the Korthik were not invincible. That knowledge was spreading through the galaxy like wildfire, inspiring every oppressed people to take up arms against their masters. Back on New Eden, Captain Morrison received a message from Starfleet. Command. They were building a new fleet, incorporating the lessons learned from the Battle of New Eden. The next generation of human ships would be faster, more maneuverable, and armed with improved plasma weapons. They want you to command the new fleet. Admiral Price told him through the communication link. You have become a symbol, Jake. The galaxy is watching to see what humanity will do next. Jake looked out at the stars through the viewport of his damaged ship.